All right. Any business you got to do first, Amy?
Um, oh, I think I'm supposed to share the slide, which well, normally we share a CARC slide, but unfortunately I don't have it pulled up. I apologize for that. I'm just going to remind everybody that at the top of the call doc, there is a code of conduct. So we ask that people are respectful and kind to everyone here and presenting, and that the dialogue is productive. And so that people want to visit us and be a part of our CARC environment. So today we have Eric Olson from the Center for Open Science, and he's going to be talking about integrations that are being developed and some that already exist for certain of their tools, particularly the Open Science Framework. Eric has spent more than 6 years guiding research infrastructure. I remember him when he was at ORCID, working with him, and has been community building, policy development, and adoption. Has spent 2 years at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media, and developed Zotero, Omeka, and more, as well as 3 years at ORCID before joining the Center for Open Science to lead the Open Science Framework production and sustainability initiatives. Eric has advanced degrees in science communication and has experience in communication, media effects, and history research. So Eric, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about the Open Science Framework and the integrations you're working on.
Cool, thank you, Amy. And this really, I talk about the OSF a lot, obviously, in lots of different contexts, but integration is one of my favorite conversations because we get to work with it. Anytime we're integrating something, there's always at least one other partner involved in development like that, and mostly more than that. So I really enjoy that part of working on the OSF. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the OSF and the center here, just to give you a little bit of context for those that maybe aren't familiar with this yet, and then we'll jump in and talk about some integration. So here at the center, we're a nonprofit based in Central Virginia, pretty close to University of Virginia, and our primary mission at the highest levels increase openness, integrity, and reproducibility of research, which is obviously a pretty broad mission, and so we use this image, the diffusion of innovations image, which you've probably seen in lots of different contexts, to talk about the various things that we do here in order to sort of get these open practices adopted and encouraged. So at the very base of our pyramid here of research culture change is making things possible, having the infrastructure that the research community decides that they do want to pursue a new practice or an exciting open practice. There has to be some kind of tools and infrastructure there to make those possible. So we have an entire team here at the center. It's infrastructure team, engineers, and product folks like myself. Primarily, we work on the OSF. We do have a couple of other projects like Share, which you probably have heard of. It's not quite as big a priority anymore, but we still have rolled out an update last week, in fact. And so the OSF is there to enable some of these practices, and I'll sort of go into how it does that here in a minute. But we also have a policy team that is working with research communities and funders and publishers to work on incentives for open practices within those communities and workflows. And then also a research team, a group that is following up on changes like that to see if the policies or changes that we're advocating are actually making the positive differences that we hope they will. We don't kind of just throw out their assumptions and hope it's going to work. We do a lot of research and evaluation with the tools as well as those policies. So when it comes to the OSF, I pulled a piece from our strategic plan here. We have a bit of a tension that we have to work with, in that something like the OSF needs to be, the research data commons that has to be flexible enough to to respect researchers' idiosyncratic workflows. People come from different disciplines or regions or other preferences that change the ways that they approach the life cycle, the research life cycle. The tool also has to be specific enough to actually be a solution to the problems that researchers are trying to solve. So it seems like you're kind of combating two different things there, but like to think of it as creative tension that allows us to really talk to communities. It's always a dialogue with research communities, and not just one big blob of here's what researchers want, but every discipline is a little bit different. So we might have started in psychology. You'll see a lot of psychology use on the OSF. That's not the only users, and that's certainly not the goal, is to just stay in the one discipline. We talk to lots of communities in order to learn about these different workflows and needs that their communities have, to see if the OSF is something that can actually respond to those. And it doesn't have to respond to every problem that exists, but it certainly has the ability to respond to some of those. So what the OSF is itself it's a cloud-based browser. You're going to use it entirely in your browser, open source collaborative management service that ensures that researchers aren't going to lose track of their work. And that is their discussion, their collaboration with their peers, as well as their files, their data, their all of the various pieces of their research. It has a place to connect on the OSF, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. And there's a very flexible permissions and access system on the OSF, so that you can have really complex projects and collaborations without any risk to exposing things to the public or to other members of your team that shouldn't be accessing parts of your data or parts of your project, or the access needs to be at a certain time, things like that. But as I mentioned before, the OSF doesn't have to do everything. And in fact, there's a lot of things that we don't want the OSF to do, and that we don't want to just reproduce services that already exist. We know that I didn't put the image in here with that landscape of research data tools that you're probably familiar with, that just keeps proliferating every few years. And there's some really great services that do really great things that we don't need to just build the same features that are already being facilitated by or enabled by other tools. So really what we'd much rather do is build interoperability with those tools, and then the interfaces within the OSF are that much stronger based on meeting researchers with the tools they already value and use. So this is what the OSF is itself, a sort of a connection of multiple services. There is the collaborative mutable workspaces that are they're constantly changing, has an activity log, but things are always changing in an OSF project, so that it could be a dynamic environment. We also have, in some disciplines, what they use quite a bit called research registrations, which are instead of a constantly evolving product like a workspace, it's a time-stamped, immutable version of your work that you might create at the very beginning before you even start your data gathering or your experiment, and then refer back to when you publish your paper 2 years later to say, these were actually the methods and hypotheses and variables of data gathering that I set out to do at the beginning. And then you can do that at various points within your research lifecycle. And as I mentioned, they're time-stamped and not changeable. So you can always refer to where you were at parts of your work. And then we have other ways to increase discoverability and collaboration, including a couple of these other interfaces that we launched last year. And so, there's a lot that's happening on the OSF itself, but really the OSF is sort of the product of multiple communities kind of intersecting to create the direction that we're going in with the OSF and the tools that we emphasize. And so, real broadly, at the highest level, these three groups, at least as I see them, we have members and supporters like funders that are provide us grants to work on sometimes very specific parts of the OSF, sometimes more generally, as well as institutional and other organizational support, including UC, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We have research data contributors and consumers, so those that are not just coming to the OSF to read a new preprint or download a preprint or you see somebody's data that was mentioned in a paper, but they're actually putting things on the OSF. They're registering their work or they're submitting a preprint where they have a collaborative project going on. Those are obviously extremely valuable to the platform. And then integrators and interoperability. I want to talk about that specifically today. And when all these things are intersecting, we really get the destiny of the OSF is that constant discussion between these groups and weighing the priorities and the opportunities we have in these collaborations. So talking specifically about the contributors, just real quickly, so you have an idea of what kind of activity we have on the OSF. In 2020, we had over 17,000 of those registrations that I mentioned. It's a practice that we talk about a lot here at the center. So if you read our materials from the policy team in particular, you'll see a lot about research registrations. Over 18,000 new preprints. Preprints are also very consumed at a very high rate. Our downloads are lots and lots of them are from preprints. 4 million unique visitors in 2020, 1 million public files shared, and 23 million files downloaded. So people are not just using it, but they're putting links to the OSF in their papers and their other material that is then referenced and used by other researchers. They download them and use those data sets or refer to those preprints at a pretty high rate. And these numbers go up not just a little bit every year, but exponentially every year. And so talking a little bit about integrators, we have two ways that we have integrations developing on the OSF. And one is we maintain an open API that's pretty well documented and continues to get new features. And we have organizations that are using this API to enable their platforms, their systems to speak with the OSF, send data back and forth to do some pretty cool things with what the OSF has or what they are working with. And I put a couple of examples in here that do some very different things in this case. So we have an R interface to the OSF. We have a client for uploading, downloading that's used by like high performance computing centers to upload and download files rapidly. A tool you may have heard of, which I encourage you to take a look at, called PresQT, which is about improving preservation between multiple platforms. So itself is, all about interoperability, but it's about being able to package and send content between these different platforms, and then at the same time increase discoverability and improve things like tags and keywords. It's a really neat tool. And then protocols.io, which you probably have researchers that in your communities that use this tool. They built a connection using our API, so you can pull in OSF content into your protocols folders or whatever they're called, and vice versa. You can have your protocols shared, exported to your OSF projects. And then, we also have tools that we build directly into the OSF. So these aren't using our API necessarily, usually using the APIs or other ways to communicate with tools that researchers are heavily relying on or have asked for. Ooh, animation's got a little messed up there, but we have the two broad genres right now are citation managers like Zotero, and then storage providers that researchers already use like Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive, which I think is what you guys use at UC, and a few others that I saw on the call are also OneDrive campuses. We built connections to many of these several years ago, so that if a researcher's they're already, my files are on OneDrive, and my collaborators want to be able to access those and interact with them, but maybe sharing my OneDrive folder is a bit of a task outside of my institution. I could connect it with my OSF project and have it easily share with all my collaborators there, and they have some of their files are on a different service, Google Drive or Dropbox. They could connect those as well, and all of them will then be accessible from that one location rather than relying on tools and files and data that's spread out all over lots of different places. They could still be living in those providers, but accessible all from one location on the OSF. So this is the look we have right now, as well as minting DOIs for Crossref DOIs for preprints, DataCite DOIs for everything else. We also use ORCID for sign in, as well as we'll pull in your ORCID ID and put it on your profile, and then we send those out when we mint DOIs. So if you have auto update on for Crossref and DataCite, then those will all sync to your ORCID record. These PID integrations are going to continue to become more robust over the next couple of years. So that's definitely a priority for us. And then what we'll see shortly is a more clear distinction between the sort of active data storage like Google Drive or Dropbox and the preservation tools like Figshare and Dataverse, which is not on this image, I guess, but we have an integration with them as well. So those will continue to also improve. And then we have a bit of an overlap here, and then we have these members and supporters, and I drew out institutions, OSF institutions in particular here, because there are several campuses that are represented in our community on this call, but also they are a really good example of, they are part of this service and they get certain, some features, technology features on the OSF out of that. But we also learn a lot about research communities through interaction with direct interaction, conversations with these members. And so they are using that service to aggregate and affiliate their research, the content that their researchers are already doing on the OSF, being able to aggregate it and affiliate it with their institution is primarily what that tool does, as well as enabling some workshops and other integrations that we have some members working on, or they are collaborating with us to work on, including local storage. But what we also are seeing is members of this group that took a fork of the OSF and are developing their own integrations that are for tools that their communities really value right now. But at the end of this year or thereabouts, we'll be able to merge those tools that they develop, those integrations they develop, into the OSF, and they'll be available for anyone. And really, one of the long-term goals, is, right now we can do a new integration or an updated integration once every couple of months using our resources, our staff here to develop those, and usually with support of these institutions members. But if we can scale that so that a member like this or other groups in the community see value in integrating their tools with the OSF, that they are able to do that without sort of 100% time of a COS developer. And that really will allow us that list of 14 integrations can become, can double, in a year, rather than being a slow trickle because we'll have a lot more community development happening. So that really is where we're headed. And like I mentioned, we'll have, I think, 2 new ones that are coming from the community later this year. One that's another storage provider, but also one that is like a streaming computing integration, which is completely different, a completely new genre of integration for the OSF. But 2 different groups working on something like that. One, another university, and one being a national lab here in the US that already has a pilot for it, in fact, that kind of works. So it'll be pretty exciting to have that be something that'll be available for institutions and for users on the OSF later this year. So I kind of jumped the gun and skipped this one a little bit, but yeah, those are the things that are on the way. So I mentioned OneDrive. That was a tool that it was somewhat limited in the application we were able to put together a couple of years ago. But an OSF institutions member gave us support to finish that integration. So read-write support and institutional authentication is actually done with one little loose end to tie up, and then that will release in the next week or so. That'll be available for anyone, not just for them, the group that supported it, but for all OSF users. They'll be able to use their institutionally provided OneDrive accounts on their OSF projects. We do have some local storage, like institutional repository integrations that haven't started development yet, but we're pretty close to having some of that work happening this year, and then possibly even regional storage options. So a whole country sort of integrating a storage solution that would be defaulted for their users, for their affiliated users. You can guide that experience a little bit on the OSF once they've affiliated with a particular institution. Have their storage defaults or other experiences be defined for them or guided for them. That's some work that's starting right now in the last couple of weeks. And then I mentioned we have some institutions that are developing things that we can merge soon. So that is without naming names just yet, that is what is on the horizon. And that's really where I'm hoping to get to early next year, is to have not just the API well documented, but the OSF itself, which is a bit, full of transparency, it's a bit of a mess to work with the OSF code, which is why it's difficult to develop integrations from, for the communities trying to develop integrations on the OSF is pretty difficult right now because it just needs a lot of cleanup. But that is something we're working on so that you can spin off just a piece of the OSF and build some integrations with it, and not have to worry about the whole architecture. So those are things that are coming pretty soon to really improve the developer experience, not just for add-ons, but add-ons being a real benefit to making those easier to develop. So those are things we're working on. And if you have tools that you work with or you maintain or have an interest in, and you have connections with those communities, those user communities, I always want to chat with groups that might have an interest in integrating with the OSF. And if they don't have a way to support that now, then those are things I can keep an ear to the ground for. We apply for lots of opportunities to get support or find support for tools that are valuable for research communities. So I hope you will chat with me and let me know what is valuable for you so that I can see if I could find an opportunity to build it into the OSF. And I will share these slides with you too, so you don't have to squint and try to remember any of this. I have it actually in an OSF project already that I can put in the chat. So I'm happy to answer questions or comments or thoughts.
We did have a couple of questions in the call doc. Could you talk a bit more about the institution memberships and what kind of benefits that provides in a little more detail?
Yeah, of course. So actually, I've got this. Oops, let me close this Zoom stuff that's in my way. This is the project I just dropped in the chat, and I'll find a spot for it in the call doc too. So this is that workspace, collaborative workspace that I mentioned on the OSF and OSF project, that I actually used a Google Drive add-on to put our slides for today in here. And one of the things that you'll see on this project that you won't see on just any project is this badge right here. And those are enabled by the OSF institutions architecture. So if you are in University of Cincinnati, for example, is a member of OSF institutions, and when Amy signed into the OSF, she may have used her University of Cincinnati credentials. We set up single sign-on for all institutions members. We do all of that work for you, so you don't have to go and throw developers at it. We get that together for you. They use that UC credentials. It goes off to the UC site, which typically universities really like that when you can have them use their own credentials to sign into services. And when they do that, every time they start a new project, and what I'll do here is just open a new one real quick. So when Amy is as a UC researcher, she signed in with her UC credentials, and when she Zoom is slowing everything down a little bit here. When she starts a new project on the OSF or a new registration, by default, she has her UC affiliation will be on. In my case, I actually have two affiliations. I have two of these on by default, the Center for Open Science and George Mason University. I could turn these off if that's not, if those aren't relevant, if I'm doing work that isn't part of either one of those affiliations. Obviously, the work we're doing today is relevant to the center. So when I started this project, I got the badge for the center. And then when everybody, all of us that are doing work here at the center, all of our public material then will aggregate on a branded page like this one, that gives us an idea of what, in our case, everybody at the Center for Open Science that's on the OSF, which is hopefully most of us, is going to all aggregate here, all of our public stuff. So you can really get a good idea of what kind of open behaviors and data sharing each institution is really encouraging, and who like individually, who are some real bright spots that are sharing lots of data, putting lots of things out there publicly. So your private stuff is not going to show up here. It's not going to get exposed, but anything public will show up on this aggregate page here. So I'll show you we'll look at the full list, and I'll pull up the UC one as an example. It won't take so long to load up. So this is our group here. We're at 60 or so, with some changing from the service they have right now to one of our other services, like Character Lab is moving to an OSF registry, which is a little closer to their use case. But with a case like a university, this is really perfect because it doesn't rely on any sort of manual aggregation. Once you've encouraged, each institution encourages their researchers to use that single sign-on. This work is all this aggregation is happening automatically. So here at UC, we've got a lot of things that were added over the last year. We see the number of contributors that have public material. We've been in that camp. That's cool. Registrations, if you have any, that all will aggregate just based on that single sign-on, that affiliation that the researcher set up when they use that single sign-on. So that is the base, the foundational technology behind OSF institutions. And as I mentioned before, I like to try to keep up and chat with the members pretty frequently to see where they have needs that the OSF might support and might not. And in some cases, there are other tools really that would support something they're after. And I like to make those connections for them too, if I can. So we also do every few months, webinars or other community events that will show off really cool stuff on the OSF that might be useful to them, as well as other services in the community that might be of value to our group here. So those are the sorts of things that we do with OSF institutions.
And another question, does this compete with or complement electronic lab notebooks?
Good question. So I have a project, I linked it to the project that I just shared with you, but we actually hear quite a bit about this. So I set up a very basic template for an electric lab notebook that you can use the OSF for that. It's a pretty good tool for that. It is not specifically for ELN purposes. So there are some features that a dedicated ELN might have that the OSF might not, but being really flexible, it can also do a lot of things pretty well. So in this case, I set up a wiki that has a template for every participant in the lab to do their daily lab entries. So again, it's real basic, excuse me, real basic template. And then I have sub-project components for different parts of our work in the lab. So we have our literature component, protocols, results, and then I linked a bunch of real examples in here as well. And I think I have here we go, a little 2-pager, 3-pager or something that I put together that's exactly about sort of describing this use case and how it works on the OSF. So I just put it right here in the chat because I do get this question a lot. So especially European universities do like audits every couple of years about the tools they use for things like ELNs. It's kind of got messed up in the rendering here, but so I do presentations for them about this sort of thing pretty frequently. And we also, I don't know if I have this link saved anywhere, but somewhere Harvard did a ELN comparison, like matrix, and the OSF is on there and compares pretty favorably with a bunch of the other tools in this space. If I can, here we go. So we do see quite a lot of use of the OSF as an ELN. Drop this in the chat too. Steps in here somewhere. Here it is. So obviously their criteria might differ from some of the things that are valuable to your community or to your lab. But there's a lot of green check marks here. For a tool that's not specifically designed for that, it does have a pretty strong utility. What other questions we have?
And I guess if anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question, you can go ahead and do that.
Does OSF support any types of restricted data?
So we don't have HIPAA compliance, and that's not a goal. We're not going to really pursue that. Some of the add-ons, some of those integrations that we talked about, do support that, or at least institutions can get packages, versions that do support storing restricted data. So those are there's still ways to make those connections work, but it's probably something you would certainly want to think through, and I can chat with you or chat with anybody who has concerns or a specific use case before you sort of proceed with that. What options do users have for archiving, disseminating data upon completion of a project? Yeah, good question. So the registrations workflow that I mentioned before, a lot of times we talk about it as something you do early, in the life cycle of your project. So before you even do your data gathering or your experiment, you write all of your methods and your variables out, timestamp that, and then you can refer to it later. But what you could also do is at the completion of that project or any project, you can use the same registry's workflow. It would be a timestamped version of that project, the day of your archiving. And what that will do is, even if your files are stored in the add-ons in Google Drive, like the one that I just shared with you, it will archive all of them in the OSF storage, the storage we provide, which is on Google Cloud. And then no matter what you do with your project or your account or your collaborators move on and do other things, they will always be archived. Those files and that content will always be archived in that registration. So you can do it at the end of the project. It will be a frozen version of that work. The files will always be accessible, and coming very soon, all of those registrations will be archived with Internet Archive. So they will be in a pretty safe space. So that would be a reliable way for you to archive your work upon completion, and then you could share that registration as its own sort of research object with the DOI as part of your research outputs. Mara asks, how can the OSF be used to accommodate big data management? Maybe you want to elaborate on what you mean by big data management, Mara?
I'm just interested in the current file size limits with native OSF storage, or if there's limits on storage with integrated add-ons.
Yeah, okay, yeah, good question. So as of toward the end of last year, there are storage limits on your OSF projects. If you use OSF storage, if you use our storage, then if your project is private, then it has a 5 gigabyte storage limit. I'm going to share my screen again. And if your project is public, it has a 50 gigabyte limit. And those weren't limits that we just kind of threw at the wall, but rather did quite a bit of research to determine just how many projects would be affected if we were to go with these various numbers in terms of a limit. These are exceptionally small numbers that were over these limits, but the ones that were over, some of them will go way, way, way over. So we had a need to put some limitations on that. So in your private projects right now, your top level project will have a 5 gigabyte storage limit. All of your sub projects, your components, also have 5 gigabyte limits. They don't like stack on top of each other. They're all separate. And likewise, the public projects and sub-projects have a 50 gigabyte limit if you use our storage. If you use external storage like the Google Drive here, that's entirely based on what you have for limits for your provider. Nothing, it doesn't count. We have a little calculator here. It's a 0 because all of my files are stored on Google Drive for this project. So they will not count toward your data cap on OSF at all if they're stored with another provider.
For dissemination sharing of the data or workflows from a project, is it possible to get a DOI to use in publications for the resource URI?
You can mint DOIs for any project, for any sub-project, for any registration, and any preprint. There, as I mentioned before, data site DOIs for projects and registrations, and Crossref DOIs for preprints. We don't do file level DOIs. They do all files have, whether they're stored on the OSF or elsewhere, they do get GUIDs, globally unique identifiers, that you can always share. No GUID gets repeated, so it's always safe to share, and it'll reference that specific file rather than the project at the top. Does that answer your question? All right. Yeah, I think that's a yes. Any other questions, thoughts? I know we have quite a few, or at least several OSF and OSF institutions, advocates and engaged folks in your group. I'm sure there are some, if you wanted to kind of ask around with groups that have been advocating and playing with the OSF for a while, certainly make some communication connections for you.
So Eric, I know that there is, I can't remember if I think Natalie might know, there was an integration being developed for like Samvera repositories, and I'm not sure how far that's come along, but it kind of made me wonder about, you know, the idea of standards. I mean, I know you want to meet researchers where they are, and, you know, thinking about data, and I was just going to ask somebody about the registry R3 data that I see somebody's put in. You know, like they have standards to get represented in that search. I just kind of wondered about the standardization of the content within in OSF and guidance for providing people about that within this system.
Yeah, I see Natalie has her hand up, so let me sort of quickly get to that second part of the question. We index pretty much everything that's public on the OSF gets indexed in Google if it's a project, in Google Scholar if it's a preprint, and we've worked pretty closely with Google Scholar on those things. We also have Share, which is another tool I mentioned before, which is pulling in lots of OSF data as well as data from multiple other sources and kind of all bringing them into one sort of library card catalog almost. It's all metadata, and it's, you know, points to where that data lives. So yeah, that's one of the places that OSF content is getting picked up by. It gets picked up by European PubMed Central, for example, pulls in OSF content. A bunch of other places that are pulling in OSF content. Now, I can't tell you exactly everybody who's using our APIs. We don't like require them to give us information about who they are, where they come from. So there could be a lot more that I don't know about, but those I'm confident in. And in terms of standards, that's a good point. Natalie can speak to this one too. This has been part of the PresQT project. But that is certainly on our minds. We're working with the NIH right now as one of the partners in not so much defining standards, but making sure that we are meeting the expectations of where those standards are and where they are valuable for researchers, so that it can be a tool that the NIH and other tools can advocate for. So I'll turn it over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Eric. I don't know that I'll be able to answer all the questions succinctly, but I'll add a little bit. And then I had my hand up because I had a question of my own. I'm going to ask that too. About the metadata, I'll share a link in the notes to a talk delivered by Google about what they index from OSF and how the population of those tags helps them index. That won't answer the full question, but it will give a feel for the ways we can leverage the different OSF component and project data population areas and how those are translated by OSF on the back end to tags that Google and other indexers can read. The other thing I like to do on all my OSF projects is give them a DOI that really helps include funder and ORCID IDs, both in my public profile and on my project pages. That helps things go full circle when you can share those elements. And I like to use the GitHub add-on so that people can get directly to the code or other files shared on GitHub that are related to my OSF projects. I know that doesn't answer all the questions, but I'll share a couple links in the notes just for examples of doing that. One thing you asked about was connectivity to Samvera from OSF and the OSF API and its treatment of Samvera. The short answer for that is that in the PresQT, Preservation Quality Tool project funded by IMLS, there is an example of a Samvera Fedora connection that you can explore using the test graphical user interface. But I think that open source code in that example for the Curate ND, which is Notre Dame's Fedora repository, are a good example of how to make that work between the PresQT services and the OSF API. You'll notice for ours that we do not allow PresQT upload to Fedora. That's a conscious choice on our part during the public trial of the graphical user interface, which is for test purposes, because we didn't want just anyone uploading stuff to our institutional repository. And there are a bunch of authentication issues and metadata completeness issues related to what we want in our preservation repository. But we have tested it for right, and it is possible, and our devs would be happy to speak with anyone about that. My question for Eric was, what can you tell us a little bit about the COS Ambassador program and whether you're still recruiting ambassadors and how people can find an ambassador for their campus and see if their campus has one now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to post we have a public list of ambassadors that is mostly up to date. Certainly it is getting new ambassadors pretty frequently, and there's a couple every week that are onboarded, and we don't really just throw them on the list, but they have a conversation with our communications manager and see what their interests are and gets a little bit of information about them before they are added to this list. And really one of the primary reasons that they would be on here is to be a resource, exactly as you mentioned, Natalie. If you wanted to have somebody who if you needed somebody to give a talk on campus, just a short talk about why open science is important, this would be a good place to start to see if you have somebody on campus or next door that could join for a quick talk. If you needed somebody from here at the center, you can ping me. I can't necessarily commit to it, but I try to show up and do short conversations if like this one, if that's something that's valuable. This one's for a big group of you, which is really awesome, but sometimes I'll even do sort of internal campus conversations. But ideally you would be able to use resources like this. And we haven't done a big marketing push for ambassadors recently because we are doing, it's not it's not going anywhere, but we are going to sort of reprioritize the ambassadors a little differently later this year as our communications get a bit of a resource jab in the arm in the next few months. So if you are an ambassador, you'll start to hear more from us. And if you're not yet and are interested in it, it would be a good time to come and chat, because we'll be doing some cool new stuff, before the end of the year. Yeah, please do. If you find folks on there that are at your institution or nearby, reach out to them and see what they're up to. And if you want to become an ambassador, you can write to me and I'll introduce you to our communications manager to get you set up as an ambassador. Let's see another question here. OSF allow users to edit the documents there, or is it more of a read-only pointer to all the files? So I think Natalie did sort of answer this. But yeah, so if you have actually a text file, you can collaboratively edit those in the browser. They will render and you can edit them. If it's a text, .txt file or something like that. Now, if it's files like PowerPoints and that kind of stuff, there is no write feature. It's not a collaborative, editing platform like Google Drive or Google Docs. But if you have, as Natalie mentioned, if you have, we have 3 permissions levels that you can put on any project or sub-project, wherever your people need to be involved. You have a read-only, which a user would be able to open to render any of the files that are in that project or download them, even if it's a private project. A read-write, which gives them permission to update those files, to add new versions. We have a version history, and all the old versions of files are downloadable. Excuse me. So if somebody got in and updated a file and you were like, oh, I don't know about that was the best idea, you can always see when that happened and who uploaded a new version, and you can replace it with the previous one. And they can, they'll be able to contribute to the wiki and all of those things. And then an admin that can do all of that, plus register or delete the project. A write contributor can't do those things. So I think to answer your question, they would have the ability to make contributions or modifications to files and other content if they have rights permissions on that level of the project component or the project. But everything gets recorded in the activity log. We do, if you use OSF storage, we also have a feature called checkout, which is not a super popular feature, but the way that works is that there's all of your files are in the on the project, and then someone selects to let me check this file out. That then is not modifiable for the period that that person, you know, has that file checked out. And then when they put it back, you know, they made their changes offline, they add a new version, it's now checked back in. The next collaborator could potentially check that out, make their own changes. And that's so that two people aren't taking the same document, making changes that then somehow have to be consolidated. So that's not, again, it's not a super popular feature, and we can't really make it work with the add-ons. So, you know, there's some limitations there, but that I think would respond to part of your question there, Brian.
Hi, this is Brian. I guess I'm more asking, like, you're saying people can have files on their different, you know, OneDrive and Google Drive and all these different things. But if they're collaborating across different institutions where they don't have permissions to each other's systems, OSF is just essentially showing you these files exist, right? It doesn't mean you can actually go do anything with them.
No, you can, they'll render in the OSF and you can download them. Like I said, you can't go and edit them directly, like in the browser, but you could download it and upload a new version, and it will replace that version that's in Drive.
So if someone from one university uploads a new version of a file that's stored on a different university's server, OSF will write that new file to the university server?
Right, to their Drive folder.
Okay.
Yep. And that, you know, is for some of those providers, as you mentioned, that sharing or collaborating across institutions can be pretty difficult within the provider itself. But if you were to add, if you and I were on the same OSF project and I connected my Drive with, you know, one of my folders, I could do with any layer of my Drive that I want. I connect one particular folder, add you to my project as well. You now can look at everything that I have in that folder, and if you have right permissions, you can make changes to that content as well, and it will reflect in my, you know, COS Google Drive folder. If I were to go look at it and you made a new update or added a completely new file, it's going to be in there.
But I would have to create that file on my end and upload it through OSF, which then it puts it on Google Drive.
Right.
I can't edit it using Google's tools. I have to do it myself.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, we've had a lot of great questions today. Good discussion. I want to be conscious of people's time. It's now 2 o'clock. So I think are there any more questions? Yeah, I don't see any. Otherwise, we'll say thank you very much, Eric, for this very informative and enlightening discussion. Really looking forward to that OneDrive for business integration. You know that already. And so looking forward to seeing that. But thank you for presenting for us today and for sharing all this great information.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And everyone enjoy the rest of the day.
All right, thank you.
Bye. I'm going to stop the recording.